No more handouts for the failure. Aunt Margaret's voice cracked through the dining hall like glass against marble. Applause followed, sharp, cruel, unanimous. Silver forks clinked, champagne fizzed, and every smiling face turned away from me as if I were invisible. I kept eating in silence, chewing over the bitter taste of betrayal. That's when the heavy oak doors creaked open. The trust administrator walked in, his voice steady, deliberate. "Ma'am, the estate controller needs to discuss your spending." Her champagne glass slipped. A thin crack echoed as it struck the floor. In that moment the applause stopped. The air tightened, eyes darting, and Aunt Margaret's painted smile flickered into panic. "My name is Elena Carter. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Have you ever been treated like a stranger in your own family? Like you were born only to be the villain in their perfect story? Because that night I wasn't the embarrassment. I wasn't the failure. I was the mirror, reflecting everything they tried to hide." I watched her scramble, lipstick trembling at the corners of her mouth, as the administrator's words spread across the table like wildfire. For years Aunt Margaret called me weak. For years she claimed my parents' trust was wasted on me. And for years I believed her. But that night, watching her composure fracture, I realized something. The truth always arrives dressed like a stranger. And when it knocks on your door, it doesn't leave until it's heard. As her champagne seeped into the carpet, I felt a fire rising inside me. For the first time I didn't look away. I didn't lower my head. I smiled. And that smile would be the last one she ever saw from me without consequence. The silence after her glass shattered was louder than the applause had ever been. Aunt Margaret's eyes darted, searching for an exit, for a distraction, for someone else to humiliate. But no one saved her. The administrator cleared his throat, his voice slicing the air. "Ma'am, the trust reports show irregular withdrawals. Hundreds of thousands unaccounted for. We'll need a full audit." Her knuckles whitened against the linen tablecloth. The room, filled with cousins, uncles, people who had spent years laughing at me, suddenly leaned away from her. For once, I wasn't the subject of shame. For once, they weren't clapping for her. I sat there, silent, still, but my heart was a storm. Do you know what it feels like to spend your whole life being small, only to realize the giant was never real? That the shadow looming over you was just smoke waiting to be blown away? Margaret tried to speak. "That's absurd. I've done nothing." But the administrator didn't blink. "We have records, ma'am. The estate controller insists." Gasps rippled. My cousin Drew actually put his fork down mid-bite. My uncle's smirk vanished, replaced by the first look of doubt I'd ever seen cross his face. I lowered my spoon, slow, deliberate, and whispered just loud enough for the table to hear. "Strange. It seems the failure isn't me after all." Her head snapped toward me. If looks could kill, I'd be buried beneath that very table. But something had shifted. The fear wasn't mine anymore. It was hers. Margaret recovered quickly, she always did. She stood, her chair scraping against the marble. "This is ridiculous. My reputation." But reputations burn faster than paper when truth finds a match. The administrator, unfazed, added, "The board will freeze certain accounts until the investigation concludes." Aunt Margaret's face drained of color. And for the first time in my life I watched her choke on her own power. Around the table whispers ignited. Betrayal has a smell. Metallic, sharp, undeniable. And that night the scent clung to her like perfume gone sour. I excused myself, rising quietly, every movement precise. Eyes followed me, but not with pity. With curiosity. With recognition. Because in that moment I wasn't Elena, the family failure. I was Elena, the girl who didn't flinch when the queen's crown fell crooked. Walking out of the dining room, I caught my reflection in the gilt mirror by the door. My own eyes looked different, steady, hungry, alive. And deep inside I made a promise. If Aunt Margaret thought she'd humiliated me for the last time, she hadn't even begun to taste what humiliation was. Because sometimes revenge doesn't arrive in fury. Sometimes it begins with a smile, and ends with silence. I didn't go back to my room that night. Instead, I slipped into my father's old study, the one Aunt Margaret had locked after his funeral, claiming it was too painful for me to revisit. Painful for me? Well, dangerous for her. The air inside was stale, but the memories were sharp. Dust lined the shelves, but the desk drawers still held weight. I ran my fingers across the mahogany, across the brass keyhole, and smiled. Margaret thought she'd buried my father's legacy under her control. He thought wrong. I'd memorized every creak in this house as a child, so I knew exactly where to press under the rug. And just like that, a loose floorboard lifted. Beneath it, an envelope. My father's handwriting scrawled across the front. Elena. My throat tightened, but my hands didn't shake. Inside a letter. Simple. Direct. His words like a hand on my shoulder from the grave. If you ever doubt yourself, remember this. The trust is not a gift. It's your inheritance. Your blood, your right. Do not let them take it from you. And taped to the back of the letter. A key. I knew exactly what it opened. The vault in the East Wing. The one Aunt Margaret swore no one had access to but her. I almost laughed. The Queen had built her empire on stolen land. That night, while the family drowned in champagne and rumors, I walked the halls barefoot, silent as a ghost. The East Wing loomed dark and empty. With one turn of the key, the vault door groaned open. Inside, stacks of files, boxes of receipts, portfolios. Proof of her greed. Proof of her theft. And one small black notebook. The kind she always carried, never letting it out of her sight. I flipped through it under the weak yellow light. Withdrawals. Wire transfers. Luxury purchases disguised as estate expenses. Trips to Paris, jewelry, cars. Hundreds of thousands gone. My cousin's tuition bills unpaid, but her closet dripping with diamonds. I traced my finger down the inked columns, each number carving deeper into me. He called me the failure, the leech. But it was her all along. The notebook snapped shut in my hand. I slid it into my coat pocket, my pulse steady, my decision already made. The next morning they would all wake to a different Elena. I wouldn't fight her with fists or with anger. I would fight her with the one thing she feared most. Truth. And truth, when it finally arrives, doesn't whisper. It roars. As I locked the vault behind me, I felt my father's voice in my ear. Do not let them take it from you. I wouldn't. Because Aunt Margaret had spent years teaching me how to endure humiliation. Now it was time I taught her how it feels to choke on it. Morning light spilled across the mansion's marble floors, too bright, too pure for the secrets it revealed. I sat at the breakfast table with my cousins, the same cousins who once sneered when Aunt Margaret called me a failure. Today their voices were hushed, their eyes restless. News travels fast when money is involved. Margaret entered, draped in silk, her chin high as though nothing had cracked the night before. But her smile, it was too tight. Her lipstick too forced. She was unraveling, and I wanted everyone to see it. Good morning, family, she sang. I trust you all had a restful night? No one answered. I stirred my coffee slowly, deliberately, then raised my eyes. Did you sleep well, Aunt Margaret? Her gaze cut through me like a blade. I always do, Elena. Unlike some of us, I don't have burdens keeping me awake. I almost laughed. Burdens. That's what she called the money she stole. The lives she stepped on. But I didn't take the bait. Instead, I pulled the little black notebook from my coat pocket and placed it gently on the table. The sound it made was soft, but it carried like thunder. Her face drained. What is that? She whispered. I leaned forward, my voice low, intimate, but sharp enough to cut glass. Your diary, Aunt Margaret. Every dollar you drained from the trust. Every lie you dressed up as duty. Gasps filled the air. Drew's fork clattered onto his plate. My younger cousin, Melissa, covered her mouth with her hand. Margaret lunged forward, fingers outstretched, but I slid the book back before she could touch it. Careful, I murmured. Wouldn't want your little secrets spilling onto the tablecloth. The silence that followed was electric. For once I wasn't invisible. For once the family saw me, not as the weak one, not as the embarrassment, but as the storm standing in their dining room. She straightened, trying to recover. That's nonsense. Lies. Fabrications. I cut her off. Then you won't mind if I share them with the trust administrator this afternoon. Her eyes widened, panic flickering like a candle in the wind. You wouldn't dare. Oh, I said softly, smiling just enough for her to taste the venom. I already have a meeting scheduled. Whispers erupted around the table. Doubt spread like wildfire, leaping from cousin to cousin. The same people who once applauded her cruelty now leaned away from her as if she carried a disease. Her hand trembled as she reached for her coffee cup. She couldn't steady it. Couldn't steady herself. I watched her drink, her knuckles pale against porcelain, and I thought, this is only the beginning. Because revenge isn't about one strike. It's about 1,000 small cuts. And this morning, I'd only drawn the first drop of blood. By noon, the mansion felt like a stage built for collapse. Aunt Margaret stalked the halls, barking orders at staff, her perfume thick enough to mask the stench of fear. But fear lingers no matter how much you spray it with Chanel. I walked behind the trust administrator into the grand study. The board members had gathered, 3 stern men in tailored suits, 2 women with sharp eyes that cut sharper than their heels. They weren't family. They weren't swayed by bloodlines. They were the keepers of numbers, and numbers don't lie. Margaret entered moments later, her jewelry catching the light as if it could blind them from her sins. She smiled too wide, her voice dripping with false composure. Gentlemen, ladies, I assume this little meeting will be brief. I sat opposite her, calm, collected. My coat rested across my lap, the black notebook hidden inside. The administrator cleared his throat. We've reviewed preliminary records. But before we proceed, Miss Elena Carter has something to present. All eyes turned to me. For years I shrank under those kinds of gazes. But not today. Today I met them head-on, letting the silence stretch just enough for the weight of the moment to settle. I pulled out the notebook and placed it on the table. Margaret's smile cracked like glass. This, I said, my voice steady, contains records of every misused withdrawal. Trips labeled as estate upkeep. Cars registered under false names. Jewelry purchased under the guise of legal fees. Hundreds of thousands drained from my father's trust. A murmur swept through the board. One of the women leaned forward, flipping the book open. Her brows arched. These match the discrepancies we flagged. Margaret's voice broke. Lies. She forged that. She's always been jealous, always tried to. Enough, one of the men snapped. His tone held authority even Margaret couldn't drown. We'll conduct a full audit. But from what I see here, you've violated the fiduciary terms of the trust. Margaret froze. Her painted face, flawless an hour ago, now looked like a mask melting under the heat of truth. I didn't flinch. She called me a failure in front of this family. She told me I was nothing. But I was watching. I was listening. And I remembered what my father built. This isn't about jealousy. It's about justice. For a moment the room was silent, heavy with the shift of power. The administrator finally spoke, his verdict cold and final. Effective immediately, your access to trust funds is suspended, pending investigation. Margaret shot up, her chair scraping the floor. You can't do this. This is my family's legacy. I stood too, meeting her eye with the calmness she could never fake. No, Aunt Margaret. It was never yours. It was ours. And you forgot that. Her lips trembled. The Queen's crown had fallen, and everyone in that room watched it roll across the floor. But this was only Act 1 of her undoing. The real humiliation was yet to come. By evening the house was no longer minefield. It was battlefield. Margaret stormed through the corridors like a general stripped of her army. Her heels struck the marble like gunfire, echoing through the mansion. I knew that sound well. It was the sound of her rage before she chose a victim. And this time her target wasn't random. It was me. I found her waiting in my room. She sat on the edge of my bed, her silk gown spilling like poison across the sheets. The curtains fluttered in the night breeze, but her presence suffocated the air. Elena, she purred, but her voice was cracked glass. Do you know what you've done? I closed the door behind me. I've done exactly what you always feared I would. He laughed, sharp, brittle. You think they'll believe you? The little orphan girl who couldn't keep a job, couldn't hold her own? They'll see you for what you are, pathetic. Desperate. A liar. I stepped closer, meeting her eyes. Then why do your hands shake every time I say the word audit? Her mask slipped. Just for a second. Just enough. You'll regret this, she spat, standing towering over me. I'll tell them you forged that book. I'll tell them you've been stealing. You've always been the weak one, Elena, and the weak ones are easy to break. She moved past me, her perfume choking as she brushed my shoulder. But before she could leave, I said quietly, "Funny, you called me weak all these years. But tonight you had to sit on my bed to feel taller." She froze in the doorway. For once she had no answer. Later that night, whispers slithered through the halls. She'd gone to my cousins one by one, weaving her venom. Elena forged it. She's bitter. She wants the money for herself. But the thing about lies, they sound hollow once truth has already rung the bell. Melissa knocked on my door. She was trembling when she spoke. "She's trying to turn everyone against you." "But Elena, I saw the entries. I saw the dates. She's lying, isn't she?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I let the silence stretch until her eyes filled with the answer on their own. Finally, I said, "Tomorrow, you'll see her for what she really is." Because I wasn't done. Not even close. Margaret thought she could smear me in shadows. But revenge is about the spotlight. And I knew exactly where to place her. Center stage with nowhere left to run. She thought the audit was the end. Well, it was just the opening act. The real performance was coming, and every seat in the house would be filled. The dining hall glittered with chandeliers, but beneath the gold and crystal was wrought. I could feel it. Everyone could. My cousins whispered, servants moved like shadows, and Aunt Margaret sat at the head of the table, her crown tilted, her mask thinning by the second. She had called this dinner herself, her last chance to claw back authority. I knew at the moment I received the handwritten invitation slipped under my door. But what she didn't know was that I'd prepared the stage better than she ever could. The administrator sat at the far end, stone-faced. My cousins shifted nervously in their seats. Even the portraits of ancestors along the walls seemed to lean closer, hungry for the drama. Margaret rose, her voice syrupy, too sweet to trust. "My dear family," she began, hands clasped as though she were blessing us. "It seems there has been confusion. My niece here believes I've done something improper. She's waved around false notebooks, whispered poison lies. But I assure you, I have always protected this estate. I have always protected you." She raised her glass. "And tonight I ask for your trust once more." Silence. Then I stood. My chair scraped against the marble, a sound louder than any applause. All eyes turned. "You want trust," I said softly. "Then let's give them truth." From my coat I pulled not just the notebook, but copies of every document I'd uncovered in the vault. Receipts. Wire confirmations. Ledgers signed in her hand. And one photograph. Margaret in Paris, draped in diamonds, dated the same week the trust denied Melissa's tuition payment. The administrator took the files, spreading them across the table like playing cards. Gasps followed. One by one, my cousins leaned in, eyes widening, mouths opening in disbelief. Margaret's glass trembled. This is fabricated. She's framing me." "Then explain the signatures," the administrator said coldly. Her voice cracked. They're not mine." I leaned forward, my voice steady as a blade. "Every time you called me weak, I listened. Every time you humiliated me, I remembered. You thought I was nothing. But I was watching. And now everyone is." Melissa's voice broke the silence. "You told me the estate couldn't afford my tuition while you were buying Cartier bracelets." Uncle Robert growled, "I invested in this estate, Margaret. And you bled it dry." The room turned against her, faces once loyal now twisted with betrayal. Margaret's chair toppled as she stood, shrieking, "You're all fools. She's the liar. She's the fraud." But no one was listening anymore. The crown had finally fallen. I remained standing, calm, unshaken. Because revenge isn't about shouting louder. It's about letting silence speak when truth has already landed its strike. And in that silence I saw her collapse. Her empire reduced to ash before her own eyes. But my revenge wasn't complete yet. No, there was one final move left. The kind that doesn't just ruin a name. Ends it. They wanted fireworks. I gave them a quiet end. After the dining hall collapsed into a murmuring mob, the administrator arranged the formalities. Audits, freezes, interviews. Margaret was escorted out of the room by two men in navy suits who looked surprised by how small she seemed without an audience. She screamed the way wounded animals do, loud and raw, but the sound dissolved in the hall like a bad perfume. I didn't follow her into the hallway. I walked to my father's study instead, the room that had smelled of tobacco and cedar the last time he closed the door on me. The desk held the letter and the key, both of which had already done their work. But there was one more thing my father had left that no one else had found. A codicil to the trust, handwritten and witnessed, detailing not just distribution but stewardship. It named a successor trustee, someone who would have the legal standing to request immediate restitution and to reallocate funds for care and education. His handwriting looped in a way only I could recognize. I had placed that codicil in the administrator's hands the moment I left the vault. I had not told Margaret because she would have burned the house down before letting me win. But my final move wasn't about winning money for myself. It was about finishing what he started, protecting the people she used as stepping stones. When the board convened the next morning, the administrator read the codicil aloud. The house held its breath. The document named me as successor trustee if the current trustee was found to be in breach, and it permitted immediate emergency distributions to dependents wronged by mismanagement. It also contained a clause my father had hated to write but insisted upon: public accounting and publication of trustee expenditures if misconduct was suspected. Margaret's eyes went wide as the administrator explained the legal mechanics. Her mouth made shapes that did not form words. The same family that once cheered her on now watched as I signed the forms to enact restitution. Melissa's tuition paid in full, Drew's mounting medical bills cleared, home repairs for the elderly cousins on the outskirts of town. I authorized the funds one check at a time, each one a small hammer blow. She tried one last time, a whispered threat in the hallway, a promise of ruin. I met her in the place where she taught me to be silent, the gilded foyer. You made your choices, I said. My father made his. Her laugh cracked like an old photograph. You'll never be happy, she hissed. Maybe I won't. Maybe I never wanted the shallow happiness of her parties, the hollow clink of glasses that hide rot. What I wanted was a life where my name didn't tremble when it entered a room. I wanted truth to have teeth. The court followed the audit. Criminal charges were filed. The jewels, the receipts, the photos, all catalogued and used as evidence. Margaret went from silk gowns to courthouse drab. There is a particular kind of silence that follows a fall. Not the hush of isolation, but the soft, inexorable quiet of consequences arriving on time. Once the legal dust settled, I stood in the empty dining room and ran my fingers along the same table that had held their applause. I thought of my father's letter, the key under the floorboard, the way a house can hold secrets like a mouth holds breath. I thought about rage and how it narrows the world until all you see is the shape of the thing you want to break. Revenge had been a bright, hungry path, but what I needed was steadiness. So I rebuilt. I set up scholarships in my father's name. I made the trust transparent, with yearly reports open to family members and a rotating oversight committee. I taught Melissa to balance a checkbook. I sat with cousins who wanted to understand how they'd been lied to, and I listened, which felt like the only honest kind of power. Aunt Margaret asked for forgiveness once, in a thin voice under the hum of fluorescent lights. I said what I felt I must. That mercy without change is vanity. She left the mansion diminished but not destroyed, to live under the shadow of her choices. That night, I sat by the window of my father's study and read his letter again. There was no grand triumph in the ink, only instructions and trust and a faith in me he'd never voiced aloud while he lived. I realized then that the true revenge was not the fall of a tyrant. It was the quiet reweaving of what she had unraveled. A family with names, not victims, and futures measured in tuition bills paid and kitchens fixed and small, steady acts of repair. I closed the book and let the house breathe around me. Outside, somewhere in the dark, a train wailed, long, mournful, then receding. It sounded like an ending and like a beginning all at once. I placed my father's key back into the drawer and locked it, not to hide, but to remember where I started and how far I'd come. I am Elena Carter. I survived being the failure everyone wanted me to be. I built something steadier than applause. I learned that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives in checks and ledgers and the steady signature of a woman who decides she'll no longer be small.